And welcome, friends. Now that we have had an understanding of why environment science is important for us as a discipline, now we are going to move on to disasters. What is a disaster? How do we tackle these disasters? Do we have some institutional setup to tackle disasters and to manage disasters? So this is going to be the agenda for the discussion today. Serious disruption over a short period of time. So this is the first characteristic that a disaster has. It seriously disrupts life over a short period of time and causes widespread losses. So there are so many losses that are caused by disasters. It could be the loss of human life. Some people may get decapitated, they may lose their limbs, they may get injured. So this could be one of the losses because of the disaster. Then there could be loss of property, material losses, economic losses, destruction of houses, destruction caused because of felling of trees on the electricity cables. So these are kind of material losses which could happen because of a disaster. And then there are environmental losses also. Many a times, as happened in the recent Amphan cyclone in Orissa and West Bengal, a large forest area was destroyed because of the high wind speed during the cyclone. So disasters can also lead to environmental losses. They can also contribute to degradation of environment, just like the forest that got destroyed because of the cyclone in West Bengal and Orissa. Then, however, there is one more unique thing about disasters, and this is that the losses which are incurred by the community because of the disaster, they are beyond the community's scope, beyond the community's ability to cope up with the resources, with own resources. So the losses are so much that the community is simply not able to cope up with the losses. The community does not have the resources to cope up with the losses because of the disaster. So these three aspects together form the definition of disaster. First, that the disaster is a serious disruption over a short period of time. Secondly, that it causes widespread destruction, widespread losses, lives are lost, people get injured because of it, property is damaged, infrastructure is damaged, roads are damaged, bridges are damaged. And not only this, the ecosystem also gets damaged. So this is the second characteristic that a disaster has. And apart from that, now we have the third characteristic, which is the losses are so much that they simply cannot be compensated for by the community through use of its own resources. The community simply does not have the resources to cope up with the impact of the disaster. So this is what a disaster is all about. And we can further categorize disasters into the natural disasters and man-made disasters. Let's have a look at the natural disasters. Natural disasters are those which happen because of the forces in the nature. They are not caused by human beings. They are not caused by some factor to which human beings have contributed. On the other hand, man-made disasters are those which are caused by human beings, which are caused by human factors. So they are also called human-made disasters. Now let's have a look at the natural disasters. You would find earthquake is a natural disaster, flooding, cyclones, volcanic eruptions. Then we have tsunamis. Now tsunamis happen because of the earthquake in the deep sea. So whenever there is a earthquake in the deep sea, it may cause tsunamis. Again, there could be landslide because of excessive rainfall and because of the lack of vegetation cover in a particular area and excessive rainfall, or maybe construction of road infrastructure through that particular area. There can be landslides. Pandemics, now that we are witnessing this COVID-19 crisis, you should know what pandemics are. Pandemics mean Mahamari. These are basically diseases caused by microorganisms or caused by animals also at times. For example, plague. If you talk about plague, PLAGUE, plague pandemic in India was caused by mice, rats, and that was around 2 decades ago. And the city which was most impacted by plague was Surat in Gujarat. So this could also be a natural disaster. It is not because of some man-made reasons, because of some human reasons. And then heat wave, extreme heat, which generally India witnesses in the month of April, May, specifically in the northern part of the country. So this is again a natural disaster. This can lead to so many deaths. So the northern part of the country and part of the southern peninsula, part of the Deccan region also. So basically UP, MP, Rajasthan and parts of Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. So these are the places which are impacted by heat waves. So these are all natural disasters. Now let's have a look at the man-made disasters. Stampede, Bhagdad, and this is something very common in India. So many religious sites have witnessed stampedes. In railway stations also at times stampedes have happened and they have caused loss of lives. So this is what we mean by stampede. Then they are man-made disasters. They generally happen because of improper management of the human traffic, because of which stampede-like situations are caused and stampedes happen. Then we have got fire. Fire accidents take place. Then we have got oil spills. While the oil is being shipped across the seas and oceans from one country to the other, it may so happen that there might be a leakage in the tanker which is carrying the oil, and the oil may spill. It may come out of that leakage and it may spill, and it may impact the aquatic life. So this is again a man-made disaster. Then we have got accidents which take place in the industries. So many accidents take place in the industry. If you remember, only recently in Visakhapatnam, from a particular chemical plant, a gas leaked out and so many people died because of that incident. It was around April or May 2020. Then we have got transport accidents, which is among the leading causes of fatalities in India. So many people die because of accidents on highways or while they're driving their vehicles. So again, a leading cause of death here in India. Then nuclear explosion is a man-made disaster in India. We have been fortunate not to have ever witnessed a nuclear explosion. However, you might have read about the Chernobyl disaster, where the nuclear radiations actually escaped from the nuclear power plant and they caused a huge destruction in the area surrounding Chernobyl. So Chernobyl was erstwhile USSR. Then nuclear explosion which the humanity has witnessed was a result of the conflict during the Second World War, when America dropped nuclear bombs on the twin cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. So that was the only incident of a deliberate nuclear explosion. Otherwise, the other explosions which have taken place, they have been largely of small scale. They have been small scale explosions. They have not caused much destruction if you compare them with a nuclear bomb explosion. But however, they have happened because of some technical issues. Then again, terrorist attack can be a man-made disaster, and this can lead to loss of lives. In fact, terrorist attacks are again major causes of morbidity and mortality, not only in India but in countries like Afghanistan, countries like Syria also. Bioterrorism. Now what do we mean by bioterrorism? Bioterrorism is making use of microorganisms to spread some kind of infectious disease. That is an example of bioterrorism. So it may so happen that somebody, I'm just giving an example, some terrorist organization may come across a sample of dangerous virus and they may just spread the virus among the population. So this could be an example of bioterrorism. And there are conventions against bioterrorism and use of biological weapons also. So no country can make use of biological weapons. This is a convention, this is a agreement which has been signed by almost all the countries in the world. Then again, global warming is a man-made disaster. However, it does not suit this particular definition. It takes place over a longer period of time, and this longer period of time stretches to hundreds and thousands of years. And the aggregate impact is very, very detrimental for the humankind, not only for the mankind but for the animal as well as the plant life also. So this is one disaster which basically evolves over a longer period of time. So this is one distinction as far as global warming and the other disasters are concerned. Now that we have gone through the different types of disasters, we need to have a look at one more type, and this is called a secondary disaster. Why a particular disaster is called a secondary disaster? I have given you the example, the earthquakes causing tsunami. I told you earthquakes which occur in the deep seas, they may, not always, they may lead to tsunami. So how this tsunami is a secondary disaster now? The primary disaster was this earthquake which led to this secondary disaster, which is tsunami. So this is what we mean by secondary disaster, right? Now let's move over to disaster management. Disasters are bound to occur. They are bound to take place. They are bound to be witnessed by us. But then how do we manage the disaster? That is going to have a great bearing on whether mankind would be able to survive, and how much loss of lives and how much loss of properties is incurred during disasters. You would recall that very recently when Amphan hit the eastern coast, West Bengal and Orissa, not too many lives were lost. If you compare the figure of number of deaths because of the cyclone to deaths which used to take place around 2 decades ago, almost 20 years ago, you would find that nowadays we do not suffer the ignominy of losing too many lives. The casualties are much less, and this has happened because of better management of the disaster. I'll give an example of what happens in Japan and what happens in places like India. If in India there's an earthquake, the casualties are bound to occur. However, in Japan, if there's an earthquake, there are very few casualties. Why? Because they manage the disaster better. How do they do that? First, they use wood for construction material in most of the places, which means even if there is a damage to a particular house, damage to a particular structure, those who reside in that structure, they're not going to be impacted much because the wood is not going to hurt them as would the cement do or the concrete do. So this is how you manage the disasters better, and once you are able to manage the disaster better, you can reduce the impact on the life of the people in the area where the disaster has struck. So let us talk about disaster management now. Conservation of lives and property during disaster. So basically the objective is to conserve the life and property during disaster, and in fact we have got a national disaster framework for purpose of disaster management, and it basically talks about these aspects. First, you have to prevent the disaster. You have to ensure that it does not happen. For example, how can you prevent landslides? You can prevent landslides, not a big deal, by planting more trees, because trees would hold on to the soil, and if the soil is firmly held by the trees, naturally there is less chance of landslide taking place. Again, if you want to prevent flood, what can we do to prevent floods? We have seen in Uttarakhand also flash floods. Very large amount of rainfall in a very small duration. That is what we mean by flash floods or cloud burst or badal fatna. How can we prevent that? If we allow water, if we are able to give water a path through which it can flow, then naturally we can save ourselves from the impact of these kind of cloud bursts. But however, what has happened nowadays in our cities, cloud bursts have impacted cities more than the villages, and the reason is very simple. Our cities are now concrete structures. There is no space left for the water to percolate down to the ground. Most of the spaces are covered by concrete or cement. There is construction all around roads and buildings. So basically there are construction all around. So water does not get the opportunity to seep down, to percolate down, and that is the reason why you see more instances of flooding and more instances of flash flooding in cities nowadays. How can it be prevented? You can prevent it if you allow water a path through which it can actually percolate down. So if you allow a large empty space, clear ground with no concrete structure over it, above it, then naturally the water will have an area through which it can drain down and it can actually percolate down to the underground level. So these disasters can be prevented, but for that you need proper planning and proper architectural support also. The urban architecture, the urban infrastructure has to be designed in a manner so as to be able to prevent such disasters from happening. I have given you 2 examples. Now again, prevention can be resorted to, but then prevention may not be possible in all the cases. You cannot prevent an earthquake, for example. It's going to be difficult. It's just not possible as of now to prevent an earthquake. You can prevent some of the man-made disasters, but it is not easy for you to prevent the natural disasters from taking place. Cyclones cannot be prevented. You can predict them and you can be accordingly prepared, but you cannot prevent them. So early warning systems basically then help you out when you cannot prevent a particular disaster. Then what is the second best option for you? You should be prepared. And how can you be prepared? Because you need to have early warning systems. After tsunami struck India in the year 2004, December it was, and so many people in the coastal areas of Tamil Nadu lost their lives, and the adjoining area, which includes the Andaman Nicobar Islands also, they lost their lives. Now India has set up an early warning system. So whenever there is an earthquake in deep sea, somewhere in the vicinity of our mainland, then an early warning system which has been installed in the deep sea, they let out a warning, they emit a warning. The warning gets transmitted to the local administration in the coastal areas, and then it is communicated to the local population over the loudspeakers and the public announcement systems, PA systems, and at least people can save themselves from the tsunami in case they have proper warning and proper timely warning. So this is the advantage of early warning systems. If you have a look at what happened in Amphan cyclone, what happened when Amphan cyclone struck Gujarat, West Bengal and Orissa, and what happens when the other cyclone which is developing now in the western coast, around the western coast, that is in the Arabian Sea, and is about to strike Gujarat and Mumbai. Early warnings have been let out by the authorities, which has helped the people to remain more prepared, which has helped the authorities to remain more prepared. So this is the third aspect of the National Disaster Framework, the preparedness. And the fourth aspect would be the response. How do we respond to disasters? What do we mean by response? How do we carry out the rescue? How do we take out the people from the site of the disaster to a safer point? So this is what rescuing is all about. And then how do you alleviate the issues, the problems caused by the disaster, which is known as mitigation. So how do you reduce the impact of the disaster? This is mitigation. So while response is basically about providing rescue, right? Mitigation is about alleviating the impact of the disaster. right? So this is another aspect of the national disaster framework. And then human resource development. What do we mean by human resource development? Capacity building. We are talking about training. We are talking about training not only the authorities like the police force, like the fire brigade, not only them, but also training the local population, so that whenever a disaster strikes, they are better able to save themselves and they are better able to cope with the disaster. For example, if you find out what's happening in Japan, you will find out on a regular basis they conduct mock earthquake drills, because Japan is an area which is earthquake prone. Japan is situated in that part of the globe which is earthquake prone. They witness so many earthquakes in a particular year, so they keep on conducting mock drills. In these drills, people have to behave as though an earthquake has struck, and then they would have to save themselves using these skills which have been taught to them by the authorities, using these skills taught to them by the authorities for protecting their lives. So this is how you can develop your human resources. This is how you can build the capacity of a community to preserve themselves from a disaster and to better able to tackle the situation when the disaster has struck. So these are the 5 aspects that the National Disaster Framework talks about. And then, as I told you, in 2004 December, this tsunami struck India and it caused widespread havoc, and because of which there was a lot of thinking in the government circles, and then a Disaster Management Act in 2005 was formulated and a Disaster Management Authority NDMA was established in 2005. Now this is the logo of NDMA. This is NDMA's logo, and what are the various functions of NDMA? It is basically headed by the Prime Minister. So the ex officio head is the Prime Minister, and it is supervised by the Ministry of Home Affairs. So that is part of the Ministry of Home Affairs. The National Disaster Management Authority will have 9 members, and the tenure is going to be only 5 years. And the job of NDMA is to formulate policies and guidelines for disaster management and share it with the state governments also. So it's not as if they just formulate the guidelines and keep it with themselves. So then they have to they have to circulate these guidelines and policies for the benefit of the state administrations also, state governments also, so that whenever a disaster strikes a particular state, it is better prepared. Again, once the disaster strikes, then they have to ensure timely and effective response to disaster. So they have to respond to the disaster in an effective manner and also in a timely manner. Again, to be able to do this, they need a dedicated force, and that is why they have a dedicated National Disaster Response Force. Right? So National Disaster Response Force is also there, which basically takes care of disaster response. It carries out rescue, relief and rehabilitation in the affected areas. So this is a job of the NDMA. And just to remind you what we mean by disaster response, the rescue, relief and rehabilitation. Rescue is taking the affected people to a point of safety, to a place where they can be safe. Then relief is providing them first aid, providing them food kits, providing them water and maybe drugs, medicines. And rehabilitation is more long term in nature. Rehabilitation means, for example, if the houses have been destroyed, then we'll have to construct houses for them. If the electricity supply has been disrupted, that has to be again reconstructed. Electric supply has to be restarted. So all this is basically rehabilitation. If they've lost their livelihood, let's say their shops have got damaged because of the disaster, then again reconstruction of shops and providing an alternate site so that they can carry out their business. So this is what rehabilitation is, and please remember that it is long term in nature. Rescue is what follows immediately after the response, taking people from the point where the disaster has struck to a point where there is no risk. This is basically rescue. Relief is providing Once the rescue has happened, then you provide relief by providing them food and other stuff which is required for them so that they can survive immediately after the disaster. And rehabilitation is basically over a longer period of time so that they can get back to their normal course of life which they used to have before the disaster struck. Okay, now as I was giving you these examples, now this is here, if you look at this particular picture, you'll find that this is basically an awareness program, and it can be said to be a capacity building program where this particular volunteer, in fact these are people from the National Disaster Response Force, they are telling the audience how to bring back, how to resuscitate a person who has suffered a sudden cardiac arrest. So this is what they are trying to demonstrate to them, and here we see a rescue and relief operation going on, probably after an earthquake or maybe some kind of a fire accident. So this is again NDRF, National Disaster Response Force. Right, now that we have understood disaster and disaster management, now let's have a look at some of the common disasters that hit India and what should be the appropriate response for these disasters. We are going to talk about floods, have a look here, and we are going to talk about landslides, which is very, very common in hilly states like ours. So as far as flood is concerned, you know, waterlogging due to excessive rainfall. What floods happen because the water gets logged because of excessive rainfall. So what should be the response? First thing is you should keep on monitoring. If you are in an area which is flood prone, hills are not flood prone fortunately, but if you are in an area which is flood prone, then you should keep on monitoring the flood advisories. Now what do you mean by flood advisories? The government actually publishes these advisories as to make the people aware about the impending disaster and to let them know what is to be done and what is not to be done. What are the haves and have-nots? What are the do's and don'ts of a disaster? So these advisories are published by the government, and they are given wide communication by the government. They are communicated to the people. So you have to keep a tab on these advisories, and you have to determine what is the flood potential, whether your building is likely to be flooded, whether your house is likely to be flooded, whether the colony that you live in is likely to be flooded, or are they situated at a higher altitude, maybe because of which they would not be flooded. They are situated at a higher level which will protect them for flooding. So this is something that you have to determine right in the beginning, and then you have to preset emergency power generating equipment, because what happens after floods, generally there is a disruption of electricity supply, so you've got to have power generation units, some generators, etc. you should arrange, and you should arrange them to start functioning once the electric supply is disrupted after the disasters, right? So this is the response that is expected of you if you are impacted by floods. Then we are going to talk about the landslides. As you know, landslides are very common here in Uttarakhand. Ground movement, which is generally caused by rainfall, it is generally precipitated by rainfall, though other reasons could be construction of roads, as is the case with the landslides which are nowadays taking place in the road that is being constructed from Tanakpur to Tawa Ghat, the national highway. So there could be other reasons also, but the most prominent reason is the rainfall. And ground movement would be witnessed as a rockfall or deep failure of slopes or shallow debris. So this looks like a shallow debris flows. So debris are flowing down. There could be deep failure of slopes. There could be rockfalls as well. So what is to be done in case you have some building or some other infrastructure, some other construction somewhere near the side of landslide? You should shut them off. The buildings, etc., if they are likely to be impacted by the landslide, then you have to evacuate. You have to empty those buildings. You have to get out of those buildings, and then once the landslide has occurred, you have to determine the impact. What do we do when an earthquake strikes? You know that it is again a natural disaster. It is caused by shaking of Earth's crust, and This happens because of the underground forces. You again have to do what? You have to shut off the utilities, evacuate the houses and buildings. Now this is very important. The moment there is an earthquake, the best possible course of action for you is to get out of your house or building, because even if there is a damage, if the roof comes down, you would be safe. So then you have to come out of the house into an open space. Shut off all the utilities. For example, in case you should switch off the electricity supply, you should have switch off the gas supply. So all these utilities have to be shut down. And then once the disaster is struck, now determine the impact on equipment, facilities, and in case some disruption has happened. So many times what has happened is that an earthquake is struck and there was no perceptible impact on the building, but because of the earthquake, the building had actually weakened, and when the residents actually entered the building after the earthquake struck and they came back to the building, there was a sudden fall. The building fell and so many casualties took place, so many casualties were witnessed. So whenever such disaster is taking place, whenever an earthquake has struck, you have to be very sure before re-entering the damaged building. So you have to assess the impact, whether the building in which you are residing, whether the house or whatever the construction is, whether that has been impacted or not. And if it has been impacted, that impact has to be first of all assessed, and then it has to be compensated for, so that the building is again safe for people to stay inside them, right? So this is one more thing that you have to do. And then again, cyclone. You know that our eastern coast faces a lot of cyclones. They witness a lot of cyclone, people in those areas, heavy rains and high winds. This is what is seen in a cyclone, and cyclone has to do with the pressure gradient, the difference in pressures in two places, because of which cyclones occur, and they develop over the Bay of Bengal mostly, and sometimes in the Arabian Sea also. So in cyclones you witness heavy rainfall and high wind speed. So what is to be done in a cyclone? If you get struck by a cyclone, or if you are likely to get struck by a cyclone, if a cyclone is likely, then first of all, shut down all the equipments. All the equipments, electricity equipments, have to be shut down, because otherwise during cyclone they might cause fire. Again, you have to listen to the advisories sent out by the governments and the local administration. They will keep communicating to you, they will keep sending messages across as to what is to be done when the cyclone is likely to hit the particular site, what would be the wind speed, what is the likely wind speed, what would be the amount of rainfall. So they keep on providing this information to the local residents, and if you are residing in an area which is about to be hit by a cyclone, you should keep a tab on what the government is saying. Then evacuate the area if flooding is possible. In some low-lying areas, flooding is possible, specifically in the coastal areas which are near the coast. There is a lot of flooding because of cyclones. So in that case, evacuation has to be done. If you look at what happened in Bengal and Orissa when the cyclone Amphan struck them, so many, almost more than 3 lakh people were evacuated, because they were actually residing in low-lying areas. So they were evacuated and they were taken to an alternate shelter, they were taken to an alternate site, and then they returned only after the flood water receded, after the cyclone. So this is another thing that you have to take care of, and you have to check the other utilities also, the gas connection, the water and electrical lines. You have to initially you have to shut them off, and once the cyclone has passed, you have to assess them for damage before restarting them, before powering them on. So you have to assess the damage first, because if they are damaged and you then restart the electricity supply or switch on the electricity supply or the gas supply, it can lead to some other accident also. Again, in case there is severe lightning, then you should not be using telephones. Now this is something that is very important, specifically for the northeastern parts of the country where lightning itself is a disaster. In this case, lightning is happening because of the cyclone, so lightning is the secondary disaster. However, if you go to the northeastern states, the Seven Sisters in the northeast, you would find, specifically in the hilly areas, lightning is a major cause of death because of natural disasters. So there lightning is a primary disaster. Here, however, because of cyclone, the lightning is taking place, so it is basically a secondary disaster. And if there are chances of lightning, or if you find that lightning may take place, then you should not be using telephones for the time being. So this is how you can be prepared for disasters of these kind: flooding and landslides and earthquakes and cyclones. With this, we are going to end this particular session. Thank you very much for your time, and very soon we'll be having a test, so please be ready. It would be announced on WhatsApp. Thank you.